that being said, let's transition into the final segment in episode number 5, which is traveling the road of the king. So here I have my trusty Road of the King copy. I have like 5 copies of these in my closet. Anyway,
It's the Holy Bible of
the
Yu-Gi-Oh,
Holy
man.
Bible of Yu-Gi-Oh, bro. So we're gonna be talking about starting on page 202 for those of you following at home. Getting the Read, chapter 16, starting with signals. So Patrick Hoban talks about the significance of getting reads and then acting on them. Now, I'm not going to recite this, word for word, but basically what Hoban talks about in this chapter is getting a range of cards. So taking into consideration what range of cards are legal and what decks play certain cards and whether it makes sense for a deck to play a certain card. So to make this make more sense, let's use the current format. So obviously right now the most commonly played hand trap is probably Nibiru. I feel like if you know anything about the current format, you know that you need Nibiru to balance out the heavy combo decks. And what Elder can do with one card, which Jet Synchron, that needs to be stopped. Otherwise, you just are so far behind. And so Nibiru is being played in a lot of main decks. So right now, if you're getting a read on a card, probably the first card you're thinking about is Nibiru. However, there are other cards to think about. You have to think about whether your opponent has Dark Ruler no more. Maybe if they haven't hand trapped you, maybe they don't play hand traps and they're expecting to draw into their Dark Ruler no more if they don't already have it. Sky Striker is being played, so you have to consider the format. Because Sky Striker is more popular, more people are probably playing Phantasme. So if you have the option of avoiding going into a Link monster, perhaps you want to do that. And there's a lot of other cards to consider in the format right now. So with that being said, he says that, let's say our opponent is playing Gear. This is 2014 now, in a format where Heavy Storm is banned. Then set a monster and set 2 spells or traps. We should learn to see this as them keeping 2 cards in hand. We might expect them to set all traps that they can, or to summon Gear X if possible. But the fact that they didn't sends a signal. It tells us that the cards that they kept in their hand are probably not traps or Gear Accelerator. We know this because they would have done something different if they were, such as setting more back row or summoning Gear X. And again, this is where Heavy Storm's not legal. Obviously, right now we have Lightning Storm. I feel like people don't play around Lightning Storm because it's like, if they have it, they have it. But I don't want to miss out on an opportunity disrupting my opponent's combo if I don't set my Cold by the Grave. So this is his comparison. And then he says we can then ask ourselves to think of all the cards that would have made sense for them to keep in their hand. So obviously right now, back then, hand traps weren't really a thing. Obviously Maxi was legal, Effect Veiler was legal. Those were really only 2 hand traps being played, and they weren't even commonly played. I mean, Maxi was popular, Effect Veiler here and there, but right now we have Ash, we have Ghost Mourner, we have Ghost Bell, we have Ghost Ogre, we have Cherries. We have every hand trap there could possibly be. So this is probably as relevant as ever because it's important to stay informed in what the current cards are that people are using to stop your opponent. And after we come up with a full list of possibilities, we can start a process of elimination to see what is left. We can do this by asking where would it make sense for them to activate a certain card if they were to have it. For example, if we summon a monster with more than 1500 attack and it doesn't get stopped, we might assume that their set wasn't Bottomless Trap Hole. I would make this comparison to summoning a very powerful monster against 4 back row and seeing if they have Solemn Judgment. I think Solemn Judgment is a very widely played trap, especially if you're playing against a control deck like Sky Strikers or maybe Guru. I think every Guru player plays 2 or 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. So I feel like that's important to have in the back of your mind. I would say that the easiest one to determine is Called by the Grave. If your opponent is thinking on a graveyard effect, they for sure have Called by the Grave because it's one of the only cards that they can have set that stops specifically that. And so, already in my mind as someone who's seasoned in the current meta, I would say Called by the Grave. If you're playing against 4 sets, I would say Called by the Grave, Solemn Judgment. There could be only one. and we'll read a little bit more. We could then eliminate it from the list of possibilities of what they could have left. If they let our attack go through, we might be able to cross up dimensional prison or whatever stopper that was on our mental list of what they expected to play. So obviously, right now we don't have an attack stopper in the game, but we can kind of see what he means. So when it comes to making reads, what do you think is the most important part about making a read? Because I feel like Nibiru is the biggest one. I don't think you want to commit as hard to into a Nibiru, because if they have Nibiru, then you just lose everything. And if you're able to make a negate, then that's very important. But sometimes I know when I'm playing Adamantipator, I have to choose of whether I want to keep that Guardian on the field or whether I want to synchro it away for a Raptide or a Savage Dragon or something like that, where then there is a window for them to Nibiru me. So I feel like, in my opinion, and it's a little hard to do in online Yu-Gi-Oh rather than IRL Yu-Gi-Oh, I try to watch my opponent and their tendencies and what they try to do and try to look for context clues, which Hoban talks about as well. So could you think of an instance where you made a read and it let you win the game or put you in a better spot to win the game?
Yeah, for sure. An example I always come back to for my personal experience was shortly after the release of Nibiru. This is at a time when I was playing Thunder, like pure Thunder. I didn't really mess with the combo version too much. I played it a little bit, but it was too expensive for me. But I was just playing pure, and everybody's saying, "Oh, Thunder Dragon just dies to Nibiru." And so I was like, "All right, I think I know how to play around it." And so I figured out a way to make Masquerena plus Titan with only 4 summons. And I also learned that if you make more than 5 summons and they Nibiru you, if you just hold a certain extender, then you can still make a board. So I was playing against this guy at locals, and he was doing that very obvious thing of like counting my summons.
Mm-hmm.
And so as like I was watching the wheels turning in his head, he was like, "Okay, do I Nibiru here? Do I Nibiru here?" And I was like, "All right, I know he has it just by his
Right.
body language and the
Right.
way that I can see him thinking." And
Right.
so that allowed me, like reading that signal that he was sending me, allowed me to make the decision, look at my hand and go, "Can I play through a Nibiru, or should I just play safe and make 4 summons with Titan Masquerena and just make his card dead?" Which Patrick Hoban also talks about, is like making your opponent's cards dead is
Right.
one way of like outthinking them and outwitting them.
Right.
So I looked at my hand and I saw, oh look, I drew the Thunder Dragon Fusion, so I have an extender no matter what he does. So
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, all right, play your Nibiru, give me the giant token. And then I ended up killing him with the token on the next turn because he couldn't really do anything else after that.
Right. Now, I agree. I was actually on the other side of that. So this was the second weekend that Nibiru was legal at the Catskill Regionals. I had recently played against it in the Brooklyn Regionals, where I only got Nibiru'd once. Didn't really hurt me. I got top 4 at that Regionals, and I was very happy about that. I used Dimension Shifter. It was pretty good. I was playing Pure Thunder. So then I played Pure Thunder again at the next Regionals, the next weekend in Catskills, and I was in a scenario where I didn't draw any hand traps, but I needed to have a hand trap to win that game because my opponent was playing Rockets. And this was one of the first weekends. I think this was the first weekend that Rocket structure deck was legal. And I had no clue what the cards did. And all I knew is that my opponent was about to pop off. I think we were both undefeated by round, I think it was round 5. We were both 4-0. And he was like popping off. And then I go, thinking on summon. And I didn't have Nibiru in my hand, but like the only way I would win the game is if I did have Nibiru in hand. So let me just fake it to, you know how they say fake it till you make it? I just acted as if I did. And I was like, all right, that was 7 summons. Yeah, that's fine. I'll let that go. And I tried to do it as, I tried to fake him out as much as I could. And he was literally, his hands were shaking. Like he didn't know what to do. And he ended on a Boral sword. So I was like, yeah, like that's like
Sword pass, that's broken.
I think I did, and then I destroyed him like on my turn. And anyway, at the end of the regionals, at the end of our round or whatever, he came up to me and was like, "Bro, you know that if you didn't do that, I would have had like 3 to 4 negates with like a follow up." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but like, I just hope that by faking you out, I would somehow make you mess up. And that's exactly what happened. So it can work both ways. But I feel like, adding context clues to, like Patrick Hoban says, like, is asking your opponent, is the torrential gone? Like, asking your opponent questions to trying to read them, I think is very, like, useful. And it's hard to do online because you can't really get a reaction from your opponent other than just them saying no or yes or whatever. But,
Yeah.
like, I feel like if I ask my opponent, like, hey, like, you have Nibiru, so let me just not continue. And if they, like, smile or look at their hand, like, something I do when I MST my opponent, I have Mystical Space Typhoon or Cosmic, and they have multiple back rows. I don't look at the back rows. I look directly at their face and I look where their eyes are. And if they look at a specific card, I'm like, I know that, like, they value that card the most, like, because they're looking at it. So I always watch their eyes and I look at what cards they're looking at, and I pick the one that they look at. So that's one secret of how I choose what to blind MST if I'm in that situation, or Twin Twisters, whatever it might be. So there's so many things that you could do to enhance your mental game, and I feel like a lot of people just focus on deck lists, and of course that's very important. But I feel like in a solved format, what it comes down to is knowing your deck, knowing your opponent's deck, but also, trying to use your mental game capabilities, your mental game skills, and trying to outwitting your opponent. I feel like that's very important.
Yeah, Patrick Hoban talks about it in the book. He says every time you sit down to play a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's a battle of wits just as much as it is a card game.
Right.
And I think that is so cool. That's one of my favorite things about Yu-Gi-Oh is, like, when you're able to psych someone out and, like, they had no business losing that game and you had no business winning, but like you did with the Boral sword play, like, sometimes it really does come down to who is stronger mentally. And it's funny how, like, they talk about that in the anime too. They're like,
Right.
who's stronger mentally,
Yeah.
and it's in, obviously it's an anime, but
Right.
they kind of employ the same concept of, like, like psyching out your opponent.
Yep.
And that definitely does play a factor. Like you mentioned, blind MST or blind Cosmic. One thing that, as a person who plays decks with back row, if that happens to me, I'm anticipating, if I've gauged the skill level of my opponent, and I know I'm, like, say, playing against you, I know that you're going to be looking at my eyes to see what card I value the most. So the first thing I would do is I ask, what's your target?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people will respond without even asking, okay, what's your target?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even look at my cards when I get blind MSC'd or blind Cosmic or Twin Twist or whatever.
Yeah.
I just go, like, all right, declare your target, and then I might look at the target.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it has to do with the poker face.
I
If you're
agree.
able
Poker face is so
poker face
key.
is a huge thing.
One story that's not in the book that Hoban told me personally when we were just hanging out or whatever, he told me a scenario where in pendulum format, I believe it was Pepe format, there was a correct play to make if your opponent had Carnagorgon, which is a rank 4 that redirects targeting effects, and there was a correct play to make it if they didn't play it. So he was trying to figure out which play to make, and he was like, hey, do you have an English Carnagorgon? Mine's French. I just need to read something real quick. And if their opponent did so much as check their extra deck to see if it was there, then he knew that they played it. So it was one tool that he used to figure out his opponent's deck lists. And I think it was just brilliant because once you figure out what cards your opponents are playing to counteract your strategy, then you're easily, able to mitigate that. So I think for those of you at home who want to get better at the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, feel free to, just look in a mirror, see how you play, like look at your mannerisms, sit up straight. Posture is key in Yu-Gi-Oh. But also, talk to your opponent, talk to yourself in the mirror how you would talk to your opponent, and try to engage with yourself and see if you're doing yourself justice when it comes to the mental game. Because I feel like if you don't and you're just sitting there like this playing your cards, I feel like you're gonna hurt yourself because people just abuse your lack of a poker face, as Zach mentioned. So I think it's very important.